Hi, guys. Welcome back to the Bold, Beautiful Borderline podcast. It's your host, Sarah. And today we are talking more about shame as I promised that we would, because as always, selfish podcast reasons, I'm working my way through it. Today we have Dr. Kiki Fehling, licensed psychologist, author, and expert in dialectical behavioral therapy. And Kiki is here to talk about shame with me. So I'm really excited. Kiki, introduce yourself. Who are you? Why are you here?
Yeah, thank you so much for having me. I am also very excited to talk about shame. Also, for selfish reasons, I think that shame, not to get ahead of ourselves and not answer your question, but I think shame can be like so sticky and also so hidden of like underlying lots of different problems that I've often found it comes up with a lot of my clients kind of later in the work and being a huge like impact on everything. At least that's certainly what I've noticed for myself as well. So, yes, I am a psychologist. I am not currently practicing as a therapist, but previously provided DBT to folks, comprehensive DBT, and I have specialties working with LGBTQ folks, suicide, self harm, and trauma and PTSD. And I have spent the last couple of years transitioning away from therapy and into the world of what we would call dissemination, kind of getting DBT out there outside of the therapy room by writing books, posting on social media, doing speaking gigs, trying to basically make the wisdom and the skills of DBT more easily accessible to folks since not everyone can find or afford therapy. So that's a little bit about me and what I'm doing.
Do you still get the same like excitement of watching people you see the brain turn and you're like, oh, they're getting it, like that feeling in therapy when you're like, oh, they get how to use this skill and it's going to make a difference in their life. How is that for you now in this different, like you said, disseminating role? Like you're not getting the intimacy of the work in the same way.
Yeah, it definitely limits it, but I will say that I still get it. Some folks will comment on videos or they'll message me via direct message or email me through my website and tell me about how my book has helped them. Or I don't know. One of the things I do on social media occasionally, I haven't done a post in a while, is I really love pop music and I'll talk about DBT skills in music and I'll talk about like, where are this DBT skills in this song? And I had someone reach out to me saying, like, wow, I have never understood this skill until you put it into music. And then they just started using music for all of their, they told me that they started using music to understand all the DBT skills and that it was like amazingly helpful. And that's really reinforcing and it's awesome. And I don't know this person really. We interact a little bit, but I won't see them regularly. I don't know how they're doing now, but there is some feedback of, that it's helpful. And specifically, I'd say the thing that's most rewarding is there are folks who will message and say, I can't find a DBT therapist near me. So, like, thank you for this. And that's why I'm doing it. So it's helpful in that way.
Yeah, it's so wild. They make the DBT credential just so intensely long and expensive to get. And so, like, although you can teach DBT skills, and like I told you, I have a DBT group that I'm starting again that's coming out through my practice. If anyone's in Oregon and you have Oregon Health Plan, Providence, Kaiser, Aetna, I don't know. Shoot me an email if you're looking for a group, basic skills group. Um, but I can host a DBT group, but I'm not a DBT therapist, right? There's that whole like difference. And it's on the one hand, I totally understand we want people to be like an expert in DBT if they're going to be doing really intense work with folks who are struggling incredibly with their dysregulation. But then on the other hand, you're like limiting providers who would be capable of teaching these skills and using this with people because they don't have that credential.
Yeah. And I do think that's, one of the most common misconceptions that I'm often addressing via social media is like DBT is DBT skills. So there is that distinction, right? That you don't have to be certified in DBT to teach DBT skills groups, and that's awesome. And 100%, the certification is expensive, time consuming. It's hard to get training, all the things, let alone folks don't usually get DBT training until after grad school when everything gets more expensive and difficult. So there's definitely a need that if you're talking about the Linehan board certification, I do think they're trying to address by allowing more scholarships and things like that, but it's still hard. So I think one of the coolest things is that DBT skills by themselves, which are able to be taught even by like non-clinicians, not in a group format necessarily, but online, can make a difference for folks' mental health. So yeah, there's a problem with the certification, and at least we can get the skills out. I'm glad you're offering that group too.
Oh yeah, it's really fun. I mean, I'm lucky in that I have borderline and I've been through, a DBT program, so that makes me like uniquely qualified as a clinician to teach these skills.
Yes.
Not that my clients know that, but some of them might have whatever, a little idea somewhere that they're like, yeah, my therapist maybe has done this before, but um yeah, anyways, I was referring to the Linehan certification program,
Mhm.
and it's pretty intense, but okay, let's talk about shame. I have BPD. I have, like most people with BPD, a very intimate, deep-rooted shame experience. Started in childhood and also comes from, you know, generations of religious trauma. Um, and I'm sure all sorts of other things, but my experience with shame has been overarching, all encompassing. Sometimes I swear to God it swallows me. And it's really painful, right? And so I wonder, like, what's your experience with navigating shame like before we talk about the kinds of clinical parts of it?
Yeah, I really appreciate you starting with the lived experience part. I do think one of the things that contributes to my skill as a therapist is the lived experience. You were kind of implying that there about yourself too, and I think it's totally real. Like I am someone, I have not been diagnosed with BPD. I don't have BPD, but I have a history of mental health difficulties. I'm queer, I'm neurodivergent, and I have deeply struggled with shame for a long time and didn't even necessarily know it was that for a long time, right? It's just like this ever present clawing for me, I would say, like in my lower abdomen, like in my gut. And I also, as a part of my lived experience, struggle with like rejection sensitivity dysphoria, which I think is different than shame, but definitely overlaps. And that is like these really intense, acute moments of complete overwhelm and spiraling, where there is nothing except the shame. I think it's a thing that when you don't like label it or have the words to label it, it can feel like there's no separation from it and you. And that is where shame gets so sticky. Like it becomes just this more evidence that there's something wrong with you, even though yeah, that's just the cycle you get stuck in. So yeah, I think it's a thing that for a lot of reasons folks can learn these negative messages about themselves and then have these very intense physical emotional reactions without understanding that it comes from somewhere versus being a problem like inherent to them.
Yeah, and I think tell me if this is similar to your experience, but like for me, when I start to trace my shame back to these early childhood experiences where I was mistreated or othered or, whatever, then I swear I feel more shame. Like
Mm.
it is this like it's almost like it's like icky, like, I don't wanna go there, I don't wanna touch that, I can't even, like, feel that sadness for that little girl. Do you know what I'm saying? Like, it's just, like, it's so deep.
Yeah. So, like, even going back to discovering where the shame messages came from, feel like they trigger the shame themselves versus engender compassion. for example, like we might hope, I guess. Yeah.
Yeah. Oh, yeah.
Um, yeah. Yeah. I'm thinking, I think for me, it's a dialectic. It's like in some ways, the going back to the early experiences where I felt this, like I felt wrong or too much or sinful or whatever the thing of the day was. I feel, I actually kind of hate the word cringe, but I feel a little cringe. Like I feel shame about the thing that prompted it in that moment. Like looking back, like, oh, I did that thing that got me socially excluded, or that got me in trouble, or that was against the Bible, or whatever the thing is, right? And at least right now, and where I am in my journey, I do think I've practiced kind of the acceptance side of DBT, spirituality, meditation, self compassion enough that I can see like that narrative, like we were talking about, and hold not only that child, but myself in compassion. Um, so I hope that for you soon or whenever you're able to find that. But yeah, right now I think I can do both.
Yeah, I love that for you. Yeah, I think as I was listening to you, I've had to master the emotion regulation and interpersonal effectiveness skills because that was what was resulting in my inability to function so
Mm.
much that now that I am functional, it's like, okay, now we can touch these other things and I have to start, and I'm starting very small. Like I'm just like this one statement people have heard who listen to the podcast, like this one statement, like, by whose standards are you supposed to like live your life, right? Like that's the only thing I'm currently doing is like when I notice that the weeds in my front yard make me feel like a piece of shit, I'm like, okay, Sarah, but by whose standards? I'm dipping my toes into that self-compassion and it's really hard.
Oh my God, it's so hard. Like so hard. I love that. I love that phrase. I do want to say before I move on, the by whose standards, because so often either when we make ourselves answer that question, either we're like, oh, I don't actually give a shit about that person or that standard, or we discover like, wait, I have actually no idea where this is coming from, and it's not based on what my values actually are. So yeah, it's a very powerful thing. I don't know how long you've been working on shame, like specifically, but what I will offer is I think that I've been working on mental health, for a very long time, over a decade, whatever, all my life, I'm not sure. But then on shame, really kind of distinctly for over 4 years, if not five. So it has been a pinpoint of my work. So it's taken time for sure. As I said, it's sticky shame. So it takes some time to get through.
Yeah. Yeah. I have not put 5 years into it yet. Into shame.
Yeah.
Um, One of the things you and I talked about, and I'm excited to have your definition, is like, okay, well, what's the difference between guilt and shame, and how do you differentiate those? So, what are your? Because I always just go back to that bullshit basic statement of like, guilt tells us we've done bad, and shame tells us we are bad. That thing. Um, you froze for a second. Did I lose you?
Yeah, my camera suddenly turned off, but it looked like it turned back on. Can you see me now?
I can see you.
I saw the light flash. Okay.
Weird.
Yeah, I think you had asked the question, just how do we distinguish between?
Yeah, how are you differentiating between guilt and shame?
Yeah. So the way that I have been taught, because I know people talk about this differently too, is what you said, right? Like guilt is I've done something bad. Shame is I am bad, at least at its core. What I have started to appreciate more is the ways in which it's not so clean cut always. Like we can feel both, at least in stereotypical like American Western discourse. I think that these can be felt very simultaneously. And sometimes the differentiation isn't super important, but it still comes back to that distinction. So the two questions I normally have people ask themselves to check the facts essentially is first, like, have I actually done something that is against my morals or my values? If the answer is yes, then then guilt is probably justified, right? Like I have done something that I wish I hadn't done against my morals and values, and therefore guilt is justified. And then the next question to ask, and if no, then guilt isn't justified. And then the second question to ask is, am I actually in danger of someone I care about rejecting me or judging me? And I think a key part of that phrase is someone I care about. And so if the answer to that question is yes, in DBT, we'd argue that shame is justified. But I point out that phrase about someone we care about because so often when there is something that we are doing or something about ourselves, like being queer or having BPD, that other people will judge us negatively for, I don't necessarily view that as like, that means that you should hide that thing and act on shame. I might view it more as like, oh, maybe you need to find different community, right? Like maybe you need different friends or different people, if you can, someone who doesn't judge you for that thing. Because so often shame isn't really adding on helpful information beyond guilt, right? We do want to listen to guilt and act on guilt when it's justified, apologize, repair, make up for things that we have done against our values. But when it doesn't fit that, and also there isn't a safety risk, like coming out, getting us in trouble or something like that, like kicking us out of our homes or getting us fired or assaulted, fear is justified in those situations. But when fear is not justified and guilt is not justified, shame usually doesn't really add much. Like, really doesn't make us do anything except self punish and self hate. So, asking yourself, is this against my values and morals? And am I actually going to be socially excluded by someone I care about? Is often the way to kind of get at, am I feeling guilt? Am I feeling shame? Am I feeling fear? What is helpful for me here beyond being justified?
Mhm. Yeah, that safety piece.
Hmm.
So this is an interesting sidebar. Let's just go down this for a moment. Because do you, I believe, correct me if I'm wrong, that you identify as bisexual?
Yeah. Bi,
Not the
pan,
term
queer.
that you
Yeah.
use?
Hmm.
Okay. Because I use the term queer. I identify as queer, right? But like, let's talk about fucking shame.
Mm.
The term bisexual as a woman, especially coming out in the mid 2010s or whatever, and that like hypersexualization of the bisexual woman. Like, I remember being like, I can't use the term bisexual because of the stigma and the shame that like the stigma that was put on it and the shame that I felt by that term that I adopted queer as soon as I understood what queer was. And now queer is actually the most relevant way for me to give myself a label. But what are your thoughts about that history of the word bisexual and shame?
100%. I think you said that very eloquently. I think you're not alone in that experience for sure. Like, literally, I'm working on a book right now on LGBTQ mental health. And literally, earlier today, I was writing about that the like choosing a different identity term because the one that actually feels most authentic, you believe will be more stigmatizing. So like, yes, very, very common. And bisexual carries a lot for sure. Hypersexuality, cheating, all sorts of biphobic messages. I think that even
Which I'd like to point out, all were relevant to me at the time. Like I was cheating and I was hypersexual, but
mm,
and still not appropriate.
yeah, not unrelated to being bisexual, right?
1000% all related to being borderline. I mean, not
Yeah,
really
it's
and really, but
right. It's not like Venn diagram 100% overlap between BPD and cheating, but like it's the same thing of like, yeah, and there's overlap with bisexual and cheating people. but it doesn't mean like bi equals cheating, right? The same way BPD doesn't equal cheating. BPD doesn't equal self-harm. BPD doesn't equal a whole lot of things that people think BPD equals. Um, and so I think this just gets to, I think this biphobia, this monosexist stigma is very similar to how shame operates at a large scale. Like we'll hear cultural messages, and then if they apply to us, if we see things about that message in our lived experience, like, oh, I am attracted to more than one gender, right? Or I do sleep with a lot of people, even if it's about the specific stigma message, for example, it can just creep in and make us think, oh, we are bad, right? And respond to that. And it can be about anything, not just sexuality. I feel like you asked me something else about bisexuality in the 90s, and I did I miss it?
Oh, I was just saying if you ever felt the same way with that, the term bisexual, if you struggled with using that, because I have not used that label
Got
since
it.
the 2010s because of all of that stigma and shame.
Yes. Okay. So personally, yeah. I think like at this point, as I said, like bi, pan, queer, I use any, but bi still resonates with me as being accurate, especially if you take it as a uh, can have attraction to more than one gender broadly. But I would say that I struggle to recognize my queerness in general because of the internalized stigma around it. I think that my difficulties with the bisexual label specifically came from other people, like other people assuming things about me almost entirely incorrectly because I claimed that identity. So it came from people, I think, especially as like a femme bisexual, assuming that I was into threesomes, assuming that I would sleep with anybody. Like, again, these very biphobic narratives. So yeah, it's caused me problems that way. But once I accepted my queerness generally, I struggled less with the bi identity.
Yeah. Yeah. Even now to this day, that term just gives me a feeling of being triggered, right? But I mean, again,
Mm-hmm.
we're talking about shame. You said something that was so profound. You said, does this thing about me or whatever put me at risk for being rejected or unsafe by people I care about? And that is a big indicator of feeling shame or something,
Mm-hmm.
incident that results in shame. And from the borderline perspective, through family systems, I mean, most people with borderline have been or perceived rejection by immediate family members, mom, dad, siblings, and then zooming out from there. And so I think like that question, it gets right to the root, right? Of is the person who is supposed to make you feel the most safe, are they safe? And if they're not, then it's so easy to feel shame.
Yeah. Mm-hmm. And I guess to be a little bit explicit too, the like action urge of shame, the thing that shame makes you want to do when you feel it is to hide, right? And so either hide yourself in general, who you are, but also then hide specifically your BPD diagnosis, your bisexual identity, your X, Y, or Z. And I think that's where, as we grow up in invalidating in abusive environments, hiding can be protective, can be safe, because by hiding the parts of ourselves that get us excluded by those loved ones, we don't have to face that rejection over and over, which is, helpful for mental health in some ways. But then even in adulthood, like I'm sure you and listeners can relate to like the shame about BPD being justified sometimes in the sense of plenty of medical providers, mental health professionals will immediately treat you differently if you have that diagnosis and like treat you in the stigmatized way. And so there's something potentially effective about the shame there of like hiding. There's also something very ineffective and unhelpful sometimes beyond the shame. But like this is where it gets tricky of like, how do I find for myself people who will accept me and treat me better despite this thing that is quote unquote shameful? So finding medical providers who specialize in this, right? like learning how to interact with your birth family or bio family in specific ways that don't feel as triggering to you, or not at all if that's your decision, right? To find chosen family that accepts you with a BPD diagnosis, as a bisexual, as all the things, whatever, wherever the shame is coming from. So yeah, when you grow up in an environment that is justifying the shame, that can is what can make it so sticky, because your body's learned that it's supposed to be listening and acting on the shame and hiding itself.
Yeah, and I think those environments can be very, well, it's so nuanced, but it can be so the actions that can result in that can be so small. Like it can be so easy to miss when you reflect back on your childhood. You can be like, no, nobody said or did anything that would make me feel this way. I just feel this way. I'm just broken. Or it wasn't that bad. I just had an intake with someone today who literally said those words. I never thought it was that bad until, I look back at it. And for me, when I look back, I'm sure there was a lot of moments, but the consistent theme was always you're too loud. Like
Mm.
you're too loud, you talk too much, you're physically too loud, you have too many ideas, you get in trouble in class too much. And so that idea of you're too much or you're too loud is like the story that has been ever present for my life that's resulted in a lot of that avoidance, that shame avoidance.
Hmm. And I think this is where like living in this case, maybe like a neuronormative culture, like an ableist culture, enforces that too, beyond the specific family, right? Like we do live in a society where you get in trouble, or you're looked down upon, or people think you're weird or exclude you when you're loud in certain ways. So like that is really happening, right? And like a child especially, we cannot meet our own needs, so we depend on the people around us, caregivers, siblings, teachers, even peers in some way, that of course we care what they think about us. And then so we internalize, like you're saying, and just slowly get smaller in our wise mind, or like change ourselves in order to not get in trouble as much. And we don't even necessarily need to have it be like explicit, but it often is. Oh, I need to be less loud because that's weird or whatever, right? But it doesn't even have to be conscious or explicit. It can just be I start changing myself away from what I actually prefer, or what I actually want to do or be or wear or dress myself as, or any of the things. And that constant, like, small step of discordance between what we actually want and then what we do contributes to that shame, because it's like a behavioral communication that we have to ignore what our internal wants are. And that's why when someone has a trauma history, when they have a marginalized identity, when they have been put into a situation where they're constantly needing to deny or suppress or quiet their internal real desires, it can cause like a disconnect from all sorts of internal experiences, including emotions. And that's one of the things that comes up with BPD, right? So that's why why shame is such a common experience in BPD too, or why BPD people often struggle with shame, like back and forth. So,
Yeah, and then like shame being the reinforcer of the borderline, you know, the
mm,
the experience resulting in all of these things that sort of like kicks off the borderline and then shame reinforcing it and making it worse.
yeah. Hmm. Hmm. Because even just then, in like the general way we think about emotions and emotion dysregulation in BPD or in DBT, like the way that they get like self invalidation gets reinforced, but we know self invalidation causes explosions, like that we can't just dissociate and suppress over and over, like that it's going to come out eventually. So yeah, it's definitely a like a bidirectional feedback loop, and for shame specifically, let alone all painful emotions.
Yeah. So tell me what your thoughts are about like what does DBT teach us about shame or how do we cope with shame or where is that world?
So I think that I mean, what I covered earlier is always like the first step. Like, is guilt justified? Is shame justified? Is fear justified? And whether they are or not is going to determine how you want to respond, how you want to cope with the shame. But I would say that at its core, like the ways to cope with shame and DBT have like two main umbrellas. One is like all under opposite action. Like, for those unfamiliar, acting opposite to unjustified or unhelpful shame by acting opposite to the urge to hide. So that's the broad term, right? And the idea behind opposite action is that the more that we act opposite to how an emotion makes us feel like acting, the weaker the emotional intensity will get across time. The metaphor I use all the time is that like emotions are little fires, and acting on them is putting wood on the fire, and stopping putting wood on the fire makes them eventually die out if we continue not to put wood on them. So this, not hiding is a really broad thing, but this might be like coming out, like claiming a queer identity or a bisexual identity. It might be like saying no to people when they ask you for things. It might be telling people what you want actively versus avoiding telling them. Asserting boundaries is often a really effective opposite action for shame for folks who struggle with people pleasing, because that's a form of shame. It might be doing exposures to perfectionism, so trying to make mistakes on purpose or put yourself in situations where you don't know what you're doing and it's natural to make mistakes. It might be for some people, like not wearing makeup or wearing different types of clothing or not hiding the like physical characteristics that they feel are shameful about them. So to be clear, it can be like so many different things. The question is to ask yourself, like, what makes me feel shame and what does shame make me feel like doing? And then do the opposite of those. And doing that in small steps across time is like, as I said, like one of the two huge ways that DBT addresses shame. Before I go to the second one, thoughts about that?
Yeah, I mean I love that fires metaphor. Also that series Little Fires Everywhere. Oh my God. Whew. Um Very good. Which was a book that I didn't read because I haven't read since graduate school. But
The book was good too.
yeah, I'm sure it was. Uh no, I think like as I, you know, huge avoidant, like at my very core, avoidant, love to be alone, even though I'm very extroverted and loud and too much. I I'm my most regulated self, best self when I'm on my own. And so it's very easy for me to stay on my own.
Mhm.
But one of the things that I've done is I like started to like make a friend for the first time in like years, like a real friend, like our morals and values and the way that we see the world and those things all kind of line up. And um,
Amazing.
her husband is fabulous and my husband and him really get along. So I've got like a couple friend, and like this is the first time I'm making friends since pre-sobriety and I'm almost 3 years sober. So this is a really big deal and very scary. And it like set off like a fuckload of trauma, last summer at first where I like had to see my psychiatrist and have my meds adjusted and all of this stuff. But over a year, it's to the point where I can like hang out and then leave without ruminating on like, oh my God, what did I say and do wrong that they're gonna, you know, X, Y, and Z. And so it is the little fires that are starting to be put out. I was thinking about some of the other examples that you were talking about, and I see so many opportunities for me of eventually getting to a place where I like can do so many things through opposite action that I'm just so overwhelmed or exhausted
Mhm.
by thinking about right now. But like, I do think that I am getting there. So that, thank you for validating me.
I Yeah, making new friends is huge and like so hard and so activating when you're a person who struggles with shame or RSD or anything in this area. Like huge, huge, huge. That's exciting. And the thing that comes to mind for me when you say that too is I think Brene Brown has said this, but I don't know if she got this from somewhere. The idea that shame lives in the dark, like thrives in the dark. And when we make friends and share at all or share vulnerably, and then they still like us, like that's where we get to learn that we're okay, right? Because shame can't survive in the light, the idea is. So, and that is opposite action, right? Like unisolating, socializing, like finding a friend, telling them you like them, telling them you want to see them again, telling them like what you like to eat. I don't know. I'm now making it up. Telling them how you struggle, telling them your diagnoses, telling them you're queer, all of the things that someone might have shame about. All of those are opposite actions. And when we can do it in community, like that's where most of the learning and the healing comes from for sure.
Yeah, it is overwhelming. I'm sure you
So
felt the same
overwhelming.
way.
Oh my God, so overwhelming. What I can say from my own lived experience, one of the things that has been most helpful for me over the past year is I've done a lot more of like what you'd call somatic work or body work. Um, I haven't seen a therapist, but a specialist in something called Rolfing, which is just like all about embodiment, feeling your body, getting better at nervous system regulation, and being able to feel that dysregulation coming, that overwhelm, and like ride the wave, like we say in DBT, like actually do it without dissociating in like small ways, which was my thing. And I didn't realize I was doing that. Because I don't like black out or lose touch with the moment. I just kind of don't feel my body anymore. And I didn't know that until I did this work. But that has been really helpful for me to work on that overwhelm, which is so real.
Yeah, absolutely. And then you mentioned the second pathway to navigating shame. What was that?
Yeah, the second kind of silo of DBT skills is what I would call like self compassion. And that's not a DBT term, but everything kind of falls under that umbrella. And I also think this side is actually also a form of opposite action, technically, to shame. But self compassion is, you know, the very stereotypical thing of like treating yourself or talking to yourself the way that you would talk to your best friend or the way you would talk to a child that you care for. So, like, not even necessarily gentle if you're a person who likes bluntness, like, you don't have to be like warm and saccharine if you prefer a reverence, but talking to yourself with compassion. So, DBT skills specifically in this area are self validation, verbally or behaviorally communicating to yourself that your emotions make sense, that your struggles make sense, that of course you struggle the ways that you struggle. It could be no other way, like finding the reason for your lived experiences and validating them. But then there's also self soothing, distress tolerance skill, using your physical sensations to comfort and nurture yourself, and then also physical self care. Often, when people struggle with shame, this is different than self soothing. People don't take care of their physical basic needs, eating, drinking water, sleeping, exercising, or just movement, because exercise is a tricky area for folks, just like moving your body, taking care of physical illness, especially uh, like showering, etc. Right? So often I think we downplay those things when actually taking care of our physical needs beyond reducing our emotional vulnerability communicates to ourselves that we are worth taking care of, which is opposite action to shame. So beyond like that kind of overarching, when I am kind to myself, that is opposite action to shame. I think that specifically going out of our way to self-soothe, to self-validate, to distract with pleasant activities, things that give us pleasure, and to take care of our bodies can interrupt like what you described experiencing, which I experienced too, of like getting stuck in those negative thoughts. Like after you have an interaction with your friend and you think it went poorly for whatever reason, shame convinces you of that and you get stuck in the critical thinking. Instead, putting your thoughts on self validation or just interrupting your thoughts entirely and focusing on self soothing is opposite action to shame, stops those shame spirals or, interrupts the shame spirals, doesn't always stop, and can be incredibly helpful. So self compassion is the other main area.
I had never thought of the please skill being impacted by shame.
Yeah.
I always have just been like, I'm depressed or I'm tired, like that kind of thing. But it makes total sense of like sometimes I just like can't look at myself in the mirror. Like I just
Mhm.
can't. And like some of the things that I need to do are in front of the mirror, you know.
Yep.
And that's very much a shame thing. That's so interesting.
Yeah. So it's not necessarily like if you're not physically taking care of yourself, that means you have shame.
Right.
It's more like what you described. So I have struggled with depression too. And like I can go into a depressive episode and then you stop bathing as frequently, for example, and then you don't want to look yourself in the mirror because of it. But then that's not meeting yourself where you are. That's not taking care of yourself. That's just ignoring and hiding in shame, right? Instead, if you look at yourself in the mirror, opposite action, very, very hard to do. Excuse me. You can then like even look at yourself with compassion, very painful, and be like, yeah, you're depressed again, right? Like this sucks. And then probably look away because that sounds so overwhelming. But like those little steps or like, okay, I do need to shower and I'm depressed, but so I'll try again tomorrow. Like it doesn't necessarily mean pushing yourself past your capability in this moment, but checking in with yourself and doing the best you can to act opposite when you can.
I love that example language that you gave for like, yeah, you're depressed again. Like, here we are, it's awful kind of a thing. Like, that's like very, yeah, self validation.
Yeah.
My friend, we could talk about this forever, I'm sure, and we're at our time. um, did we forget anything? Like, is there anything that seems important where DBT and shame are concerned?
Um, I wouldn't say so. The thing that I just want to make sure people know about, because it's not a DBT resource, is there is a website. I think it's selfcompassion.com, but Dr. Kristen Neff, she's not a DBT therapist, but she entirely talks about self-compassion and has amazing stuff on that topic if folks haven't heard of that before and want to learn more.
Yes. Yeah, there's some free activities on her website. She's also had some TED Talks and things like that. So, yeah, definitely definitely check that out. Where can people find you if they want to follow you and aren't already?
Yeah. You can find me at my website, kikifehling.com, KIKIFEHLING. But then otherwise, I'm on almost all social media platforms with the handle at DBT Kiki.
Very cute. I like that. That's cheeky.
Yeah.
Kiki, thank you so much for your time. So appreciate you being here. And yeah, I feel very validated by our conversation. I'm sure other people will as well.
Yeah. Thank you. This was really lovely to get to talk about it, not just on the clinical lens. So thank you for sharing vulnerably and for allowing a space for me to, because we can act opposite to shame in the meantime, honestly.
Yeah, truly, right? I know I was
Yeah.
fearful there during one point. So yeah, I think we
Mm,
were. I think we were real.
love that. Yeah.